so that it would give a better sound coverage to for the audience of people who were coming. And afterwards, she came over to me and she was absolutely fuming. And I said to her, "What's the matter?" She said, "Well, I've just asked these guys to move the PA and they won't move it." And I said to her, "Why is that?" She said, "It's because I'm a woman. They will not take an instruction from a woman." And I said, "But you're the director's wife." She said, "It doesn't matter. I'm a woman." And it's funny how that, when Ruth is talking about injustice, I felt a real sense of injustice. I said to Catherine, we must start to think about actually what we're teaching these students at this missionary training centre. And so we actually developed a curriculum which looked at the role of women in the church and the importance of women in the church. And this was quite revolutionary to these men, these young men who are working who are being trained in the missionary training centre. And then we continued with that programme as we worked in other places in India. But as always, when God is talking about something we need to be doing, he's also talking about something he wants to do here. So this is God's economy. And he was talking to me about actually what's your attitude to women and women in the church. And so it actually began a process, actually. And I'll tell you a little bit about where it began. Because I was brought up in a very violent household where my father was a very violent man. And if my mum didn't do as she was told, she was beaten. And it was as simple as that. And he never asked her opinion. He never asked her what she thought. All she got was instructions. And so as you're brought up in that, you think that this is normal, and actually that the worth of a woman is less than the worth of a man was a very clear message across home. Because I was a boy, I've got two sisters. I was the favourite. My grandparents reinforced this attitude male. So when I left home, I had an impression in my mind that actually that I was worth more than a woman. And I got married, and brought this into our marriage, but that's for a separate talk. And of course, these were not the only influences which come at me. And I was just thinking about, so as we were preparing for this, we were looking at the influences that the world has upon us as men and as women. And there were so many to choose from. So I just picked a few out. Hope. Yeah, could you move the slide on? You have to move the cursor. Yeah, next one. Next one, please. And so I looked at sort of equal pay, because as a man, it would never cross my mind that a woman might be paid less because I'm a man. I always get preferential treatment. But actually, if you look at the statistics, since the Equal Pay Act came out, that since 2008, there have been 368,000 complaints relating to equal pay. So this is women bringing complaints about the fact that they're not being paid the same amount. So you're looking at a total of 29,000 complaints a year. Yeah. Yes. So that sends a message that women are worth less than a man. So can I have the next slide? So if you look at the world of sport, now this just happened to be on while I was doing that. Yeah, next. And there's a very famous race, cycling race, as you know, I'm into cycling, and which goes from Paris to a place called Roubaix. And it's a very difficult race. And this is the guy who won it. His face is completely caked in mud because it's a very muddy, filthy race. And the black lines are just the tears coming out of his eyes as he won. And I went online to have a look at this because this is the first year that women have actually competed in this race. And so I went onto Google, got these images. Now, the reason I put a photograph of a man on there is because I couldn't find a photograph of a woman. And again, the prize money, which is there, you can see that 91,000 euros is what the prize money allocated for men is. And for the women competing in the same race is 7,000. So again, and this is just one simple example. I mean, if you look at sport in general, men are worth more than women. I know there are commercial things to think about as well, but actually there's a message in there which is not overtly stated, but says that a man competing in a sport is worth more than a woman. Could I have the next slide? And this was a place of work. Yeah, I can just press it together. There was I just found this as we were looking, that there was a surgeon was starting surgery. He got 4 students with them. One of them was a woman. And he said, "Good morning, gentlemen." And so the woman said, "Good morning, Dr. Taylor." And no response. He said, "This is our patient. This is what we're doing." And so she blanked. And this was his response. He told her she was being oversensitive and that she should basically shut up and get on with it. So again, yeah, you can just press the. So if you say, actually, I am being treated, if you're treating me as being worth less, then a man's response to that is, you're being oversensitive, just get on with it. And so this is a mindset that as a man that I bring as a Christian into my Christian life. And this mindset has an impact on the way that I read Scripture. And it's important that I understand where I'm coming from when I'm reading Scripture. Otherwise, you just read it as a man is worth more than a woman. And on my way to work, I have a Bible in a year on. It's read by David Suchet. And this was last week, and this is what I heard. Could I have the next slide? And he was reading from Corinthians. And so it says, Christ died for our sins according to the Scripture. He was buried and raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. And he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to the apostles, and last of all, to me. And my question is, what's missing? Yeah. Unbelievable, isn't it? When I read that, it just hit me. Bang. You know, and what is our response as men? You know, when a woman comes and says to me, is that right? Who did Jesus first appear to? And it's not mentioned anywhere in there. So do I go to, oh, stop being oversensitive? It means it also appears as well. Or do we actually sort of say to a woman who raised that question, I have no idea why it's not mentioned there. But if I take you to John's Gospel, this is what John wrote.
They said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? And she said to them, They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him. Having said this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. He said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher.
So it's very clear, actually, that who Jesus thought was important and who he appeared to first. And so I'm now going to hand over to part two.
I think as part of thinking about this, we all have to think about our own mindsets, because we do all take on what the world tells us without meaning to. And so I was going to read you a passage, and I just want you to imagine yourselves part of it. Jesus was so different. Women in Jesus's time were likely not property owners. They belonged like an object to their fathers first, and then they were handed to their husbands, and then they belonged to their husbands. So they had very little sort of control over their own lives, only what their husbands and fathers let them do. But also, they weren't taught, so they weren't schooled. So again, that kept them unable to engage in the world in the same way. But even so, there were also the Pharisees who were following the rules of the church, that you mustn't speak to a woman outside your family. In fact, there were some Pharisees that were known as the black and blue Pharisees, because they always looked at the floor when they walked about, so that they were likely to walk into things. But the reason they looked at the floor was so that they wouldn't even look at a woman, much less speak to her. So this is the environment where Jesus is. And how does he treat women? He speaks to them. That's why the Samaritan woman mentioned, "You're talking to me. I'm a woman." It was a real shock to her. But then thinking, and Mary sat at his feet to learn. So he felt it was okay for Mary to be taught just like the others. He didn't say, "No, go." He accepted that she was sitting and learning with him. And there was a moment on a Sabbath in the synagogue. And imagine the synagogue. Here we are. It's really busy. Maybe it's busier than normal because Jesus is here and everyone wants to come and hear. And the person speaking in a synagogue would sit in the middle. And the most important people would be nearest. And as you were less important, you'd go. And so the women were right round the edges. They were always right at the edge. And imagine, so Jesus is talking, and you're sitting and you're here and you're wanting to hear what he says. And suddenly he stops. Why has he stopped talking? What's going on? And he looks right over at the back. Is a lady who's bent over. She's been bent over for 18 years. He said she was held by a spirit. And he calls her over. And there she is. She's not only a woman, but also disabled. And he speaks to her and he brings her to the front. So he puts her in the place of honor among the most important people. And he speaks to her. And he says, "Woman, you're released from your bondage." Can you imagine the Pharisees? What's going on? He's speaking to her. He's got her at the front. What is he doing? And then he touches her. And immediately she's here and she stands up. And then she's praising God. And the synagogue leader stands up and says, "Come and get healed on the other days. What are you doing? You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath." And what did Jesus say? He said, "You take your ox and give them water, but why is it not okay to heal this daughter of Abraham on the Sabbath?" And so he was pointing out that the Pharisees thought that animals were more important than another person. And when he gave her the name daughter of Abraham, he made her equal to them because they called themselves sons of Abraham. And that was, you can imagine that their world was just turned upside down. And that's so important to remember when we're thinking about our attitudes. And what we're not saying is that we're the same. We're quite clearly, men and women are different. And actually, Genesis says we are made in the image of God, male and female. He created them. And so there's something really important about men and women together that demonstrate the image of God in the way that one on their own couldn't. And so that's really important. But just our challenge to you is just to look at the messages that we hear all the time and think about how Jesus turned them on his head. We are equally valued and equally loved, whoever we are.
Okay. We thought we'd just give you a couple of minutes if you had any questions or